Hello and welcome back to Illuminate Inclusion's Quickfire Questions. I'm here with Lauren again today, and we are talking today about making social arrangements. There are lots of topics around friendships and social interactions and challenges across that wider topic that we could talk about. But today we're specifically focusing on making social arrangements. So whether this affects adults who are not engaging with their friends after work or kind of knowing how to get involved in some of those arrangements or just avoiding them, or whether you're a parent of a child who is not seeing friends after school or is reaching that stage where they're starting to become more independent and their peers are seeing each other socially and you're worried that your child isn't involved. This is really thinking about what those challenges are. Lauren, do you want to talk a little bit about your experience with this?
Yes, so I view making a social arrangement in a five-step plan. The first step is building up the courage to organise a social arrangement. The second is the anticipation and planning of the arrangement. Third is the actual arrangement and however long that takes and dealing with the people there. And then fourth is recovery. And fifth is the cycle of making an arrangement begins again.
Wow. So there's actually, I suppose, from your experience and your challenges with this, you've created like a five-step plan that goes in chronological order. So I would imagine that within each of those, there are some specific challenges that affect you and might affect everybody a bit differently. And there are also some strategies, hopefully, we'll be able to talk about today on how to tackle some of those challenges at each stage. So if we go straight in with that first part of your plan and thinking about that build up and the anticipation of making a social arrangement, I would imagine that at that point, one of the key challenges is actually emotional rather than anything that's logistical at that stage. And it's that sort of fear of rejection on what happens if somebody says no, or what happens if I put myself out there and then I feel really embarrassed, or I feel ridiculed, or I realize that nobody wants to spend any time with me. Is that sort of what you were thinking about?
Yes, yes.
So how do you handle that? Is there anything that you do specifically?
I break it down. I take it into more manageable steps. I'll if I want to see a group of people, I'll test the waters and ask someone individually, "Are you free this day? I'm thinking of doing something. Shall I put it on the group?" So I kind of can see at least one person can join the arrangement. I do prefer to make social arrangements just in smaller groups. It's more manageable for me. Um, and but I do struggle with finding dates and dealing with organising the event because I'm not very confident in that.
So that comes across like that first step of kind of the emotional anticipation, then also the second step that you mentioned around actually logistically planning the arrangement. So that's actually a really good tip. I know a lot of younger people and teenagers tend to use group WhatsApp messages and have polls going in groups and things like that. So putting yourself out there in that kind of environment, I think is particularly challenging. So handling some of that kind of feeling of rejection sensitivity by testing it in the, as you said, with one person first, checking that one person's okay with it before you put it out, so you know it's not going to be an outright rejection when you post it in a group. That's one really great strategy on how to handle things. And also I think managing expectations of, do you need to have everybody there, or if you would prefer to just have one or two people, are you better just messaging those people individually? Do you find it easier to talk to people if you know that they've got a shared interest, for example, and it's an activity that you'll both want to do? Does that make the planning and the organising easier as well?
Yes, definitely. It's easier to do something or make an arrangement and if everybody has the same interest. I struggle sometimes when people have different moods and fancy doing different things. I don't like the having to kind of argue out what we're going to do. I normally just go whatever you want to do. I find it easier. It
Right.
frustrates me.
Even if it's something that you don't want to do, would you then go along with it?
I wouldn't love it. I probably wouldn't put my best face on for it. Um,
So that then impacts then on the next stage. So it's almost that you've got to get those first stages right to be able to enjoy and get something out of the actual arrangement that comes in like step 3. So when it comes to kind of organizing and planning things, you said that's something you find difficult.
Mhm.
Would it help, for example, to, if you've got that one person you've messaged first, to then go, well, actually, could you lead on making the arrangements for this? Is that something that you have with any friends?
Yes, definitely. I think over the years we've all learned our roles in this in the friendship group, and that's something we'll talk about at another time. But friendship roles are really important. People do tend to kind of assume the role. I know that I tend to actually do the asking of the arrangement, but the actual planning of it, I leave up to other people, and we just do a group consensus of what everyone fancies doing. But sometimes I will just text, can you ask on the group, can we do this? Or say, do you want to do this? If you do, support me so that we can do this.
I like that. So knowing you've got a bit of backup first is always
Yes.
good. I think one of the things that as you said, we'll speak about social arrangement, like social groups and dynamics in a different Q&A. It's a whole other topic, I think. But knowing that within just the making social arrangements, you've got roles. In some ways, I suppose that one eases the challenges because you're not doing the things that you find the most difficult, and you're letting someone else do that who maybe doesn't find that so difficult. But also it creates an element of predictability that you know what's expected of you and everyone else knows what their job is. And you can then have a bit of a routine when it comes to it as well to ease some of the pressure.
Hmm. We tend to pick social arrangements based on a routine. We have the set few things that we do that makes me more comfortable to go out and want to do them. The cinema is a really great one for struggling to make a social arrangement with friends because it's very limited in terms of how much time you're spending talking to each other, because you get to the cinema, you're just watching the film, you don't really have that high level of social engagement.
Right. So knowing at that planning stage what you're going to be able to cope with is also really helpful in choosing an activity to do that's going
Hmm.
to be something that you can actually enjoy, because I think there's also an element of all of this that there's so many challenges around planning and making the arrangement that by the time you get to it, actually it's not really something you want to do. You don't want to be there necessarily, or maybe as a child or as a teenager you feel like you're pressured into doing it because everyone's worried that you don't have any friends, so you better go along to certain things, otherwise everybody will panic and worry about you. And actually it's not something you want to be doing, and it's not best for you or your own mental health to put yourself in that kind of situation. So there are some of these stages in planning that are around what's actually right for me as well as how do I handle some of those challenges around either the emotional side or the logistical side of getting to that arrangement as well. So if we then kind of get to the day of the arrangement and you're actually going out and you're seeing people, what are some of the things that you think are really a barrier on the day of an arrangement?
So on the day, I feel quite anxious a lot of the time. My anxiety tends to be the biggest barrier, which kind of feeds into my ability to complete executive function tasks. So I do struggle to get out of bed a lot of the time on the day, maybe of a social arrangement, if I'm not busy actually during the day and it's in the evening. Um, to be able to drive to get there and not wanting to feel like a burden to my parents because I just can't drive and I need a lift, and then having to organise what time they're going to pick me up, and not to be embarrassed that at 22 I'm having to get my parents to pick me up for an arrangement. um, I think also pre-planning conversations that you're going to have with people and trying to put a sense of certainty onto something that's uncertain, because you don't know what your friends are gonna, what mood they're going to be in, or how you're going to get there, if there's going to be traffic and then you're just going to be in a bad mood during the arrangement, and is my face going to pull a face and I don't know that I'm pulling a face.
So there's a lot of around the kind of social dynamics and social etiquettes again in that part of kind of just getting there on the day, but there's also a lot of problem solving. And I wonder if one of the tips that we could give to parents, something that I talk about in my work, is how can you take some of that pressure off? If you want your child to go and enjoy something, what can you do to ease the pressure in advance? Because it may well be that on the day that they are feeling that anxiety and they can't communicate it, so they're going, I just don't want to go out, and they kind of put their foot down and go, I'm not going today, and you kind of left wondering what's going on and why. But actually, if you know that, for example, either they can drive but they don't feel comfortable driving on that day, or they're going to be anxious, or they're pre-planning conversations in their head, what can you do as a parent, whether that is role playing some of those scenarios out with them and letting them talk out loud what those worries are about what happens if this person says this, and what happens if this person does that, or what happens if someone's late, what happens if there's traffic, and kind of working through how to problem solve some of those things, or supporting them also maybe to have an emergency backup plan of, if you get there and no one else is there, just pick up the phone and call me, and I'll keep my phone with me so you know. Or don't worry about worrying about public transport times, because we know you worry with that, so we're going to give you a lift and then you don't have to worry. And as a parent, I can tell you what time we need to leave. So I'm taking some of the pressure off for you, even though you either can drive or can use public transport. It's just maybe one challenge too many on that day. Is there anything else that you would suggest that's like one specific technique that you would use just to help manage on the day?
To do something familiar, it takes off the pressure. I mentioned it earlier, but if you get into a routine of what you do on your social arrangement, it kind of lessens the unpredictability. We tend to do stuff at home a lot now, so there's less sensory pressures of a restaurant. Or we'll do something with an activity, which lessens the burden of worrying about conversation, because you can focus the conversation on your activity, like bowling, what's going on during the game, or well done. Like, those conversations are easier. I try just to keep calm for us leading up to it, and try not to put too much pressure on myself. Even though I feel it, I just try and relax beforehand and not get overstimulated.
I think those are all really helpful points, whether you are a parent or a supporter of somebody who needs that bit of help, or if you as a young person or as an adult are going through that, then knowing not to put too much pressure on yourself, knowing if you've got a social arrangement later in the day that you might just need a bit of a calmer day beforehand, and giving yourself the time to kind of work through some of those problems that we've spoken about. And I think that tip around creating something that's routine and predictable, it's so easy to go, why don't you just try this, or why don't you do that, or everyone else is having a go at this, don't you want to do something new? And actually, there's nothing wrong with keeping things predictable. If the aim on the day is to spend time with friends, then why does it need to be a really big challenge of trying something new and unfamiliar as well, and making sure that environment is comfortable? So these are all really helpful points. If we go on to step 4 of your process, which is recovery, what is it that you think is sort of, you wake up the next day, are you feeling physically tired, emotionally tired? What is it that takes so much recovery that's needed?
Well, the actual arrangement tends to take the recovery. During an arrangement, you're trying to keep up with perhaps multiple conversations, deciding what food you're going to eat, knowing best how to respond to other people's emotions, which is really difficult. If they've had a bad day and they want to vent to you, understanding that. Again, sensory environments. So you've got a lot to recover from post social arrangement. For me, it's normally exhaustion. I can't really function. Conversations, I can't really have them, but I need to, if that makes sense. I need to voice exactly what's happened. So I'll come home and I'll tell my mum in every single detail, this is exactly what happened. This one did this one said that, I said this, we did that. And it's like a list, like a non-stop list. And I can't be calm until I've blurted everything out. And I go, have I said something wrong? Did I do this? So that I ruminate for a while. And that in itself is exhausting. And then, yeah, just kind of learning how to, you've got such an adrenaline. So it's just learning how to manage your adrenaline afterwards, because you can't leave it there.
Right. So one of the things that actually I talk about with some of my clients is how to expect a crash after a high. And it is normal, if you experience quite intense emotional reactions, that once you've had a really positive, even if it's been a great social arrangement and you're really buzzing, you're then going to come crashing down. The higher you go, the more the kind of the further there is to fall back down. And trying to, like you say, if you ruminate over these things, if you're overthinking, if you're analyzing every detail, how do you give yourself the time and space to do that and recover in a way that, you know, that's what you need to do, if those are the steps that you need to go through, then let yourself have that time. At the same time, you don't want to overthink, and you don't want to put too much onus or kind of you don't want to allow those feelings to take over and let them kind of consume you. So finding that balance, I would imagine, is difficult. And I would also think for parents to know that it's normal that your child might come home and want to talk through every detail, and maybe you just need to listen and let them do that. It doesn't mean that you need to step in and respond to everything, that they don't necessarily need anything other than that is their kind of recovery process of going through what happened on the day, and recognizing that that's just how they handle the recovery of moving on from a social arrangement that has been quite overwhelming and exhausting for them.
Yeah, you just need to process it. It's not necessarily I need a solution to what's happened. It's just my processing time, and I have to verbalize in order to process.
It's an external processing thing, isn't it? Some of us do that. We want to process everything out loud, and for others, they may want to process that internally. And so then I can imagine as parents knocking on their child's bedroom door going, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" Because they've come home from a social arrangement and gone to lie down in a dark room, and actually they are just also processing, but just in their own way, and they might just need a little bit of time to do that. And everybody will have different length of time it takes them, I'd imagine, to go through this. So there's some really interesting points in there. Let's quickly just touch on the fifth part of your cycle, which is kind of starting again. And I think sometimes the social etiquette can be quite challenging of, at what point do you message someone and say, "Oh, I had a really great time today, do you want to do it again?" Or if someone messages you and says, when are we next going to see you? And you're thinking, I still need like a whole week off before I speak to anybody ever again. How do you handle that? And what can you recommend people put in place?
Normally afterwards, if I've been at a friend's house, I normally just text them saying, "Thank you for hosting." Again, their parents might be there as well. So you have that in your mind, you just say thanks to their parents as well before you leave. That I tend to do that. Right. But if we've like been out and just met up, and I'll just say, "Had a good time, great to see you," and then leave it. And then later on, would text them maybe about a week or two later. We're quite low maintenance, that we don't need to see each other multiple times a week. And I'm very grateful for that. But it is difficult to understand when's the right time. But then also, when does it fit into other people's schedules? Because you go back rounds again trying to find a date in which you can meet up anyway.
So I'd imagine having a regular time slot works as part of that. Even if you say it's once a month that you're going to do it on a Thursday, then at least you know when that is.
Exactly, the pressure's off.
And the pressure's off. But I actually really like what you said about your message afterwards. But that message can just be, "Thank you, I had a nice time." It doesn't need to be, "Let's make another social arrangement straight away." It can just be sending a message saying, "Thank you, I had a nice time." It's almost scripted, and you say the same thing every time. And then you don't feel the pressure to say anything else. You don't need to immediately jump into making another arrangement, because you might need a bit longer to recover before you want to start again.
I think it's really important as well, just to know that within friendships, you don't need to be with each other all the time. And I think that's really important with the making of social arrangements, that yes, they're good and they look like a stereotypical friendship would look, but at the same time, it's not always necessary to have it. That's not all a friendship is.
And I think that leads really nicely into a separate topic of conversation we can have another day about what do friendships need to look like, and are social arrangements on a regular basis something that's important in every friendship, and how to handle some of the worries about that if you have them. But today we've just been speaking about some of those challenges of making a social arrangement, and you gave us a really great 5-step plan that helps think about the challenges, but also can give different strategies and solutions to help at each stage. So thank you for sharing that with us. You have been listening to Illuminate Inclusion's Quickfire Questions, talking about making social arrangements. We hope you found this video helpful, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.